I remember the first time I met Claire like it was yesterday. She was standing by the coffee machine at work, fumbling with the buttons and cursing under her breath because the thing kept spitting out half cups. I laughed and offered her mine, joking that the machine hated newcomers. She smiled at me with this disarming grin, the kind of smile that made you think she was genuinely warm. That was the beginning. We became fast friends, grabbing lunch together, sharing inside jokes, staying late at the office to gossip about co-workers while pretending to be productive. At first, she felt like the sister I had never had. I trusted her almost immediately, which isn't something I do often. I've always been cautious. Probably because growing up, my mum taught me that people show their true colours only when it benefits them. But Claire was different, or at least that's what I believed. We started talking about everything. My relationship with Daniel, my insecurities, even my fears about turning 30, and feeling like I hadn't accomplished enough. She listened intently, nodding and giving me advice that sounded wise, like she had lived through all the same things. It made me feel safe. Looking back now, I can't believe how easily I let her in. I remember one evening when she invited me over to her apartment. It was small but cosy, filled with candles that smelled like vanilla and books stacked in messy piles on the floor. She poured us glasses of red wine and we sat cross-legged on her couch, talking about dreams and disappointments. She told me she had grown up with nothing, that she had fought for every bit of stability she had. I admired that, maybe even envied it, because I had always felt cushioned by my parents' support. She told me she had no one to lean on, so when she looked me in the eye and said I was like family, it hit me deep. It felt real, but slowly little cracks started to show. Small things at first. She'd say she texted someone for me when she hadn't. Or she'd claim someone said something unkind about me. But when I asked them directly, they looked confused. I brushed it off because I valued her so much. I told myself she was just misunderstood, that maybe she had worded it wrong. Still, something gnawed at me. One night, she told me Daniel had been seen at a bar with another woman. My stomach dropped. I remember sitting on my kitchen floor after she left, hugging my knees, crying into my sleeves because I didn't want to believe it, but also couldn't shake the image. The way she said it with such certainty, like she was protecting me, made it sound true. But when I confronted Daniel, he looked stunned. He even showed me his receipts from that night, proving he had been working late and ordered takeout. The guilt I felt for doubting him was crushing. I told Claire about it and she acted offended, like I had insulted her for questioning her loyalty. She said she was only trying to look out for me. I apologized to her. Imagine that. I apologized to her for doubting a lie. That moment should have been my wake-up call. But it wasn't. Instead, I kept leaning on her more, convinced that maybe she was just clumsy with words. My mum always told me I was too forgiving, and maybe she was right. The strange thing is how easily lies can slip into your life when they're wrapped in comfort. With Claire, everything seemed natural. She had this way of speaking, soft but convincing, like she knew more than she was letting on. She would tilt her head, lower her voice, and make me feel like I was being trusted with a secret. And who doesn't like to feel chosen? Special. I fell for it every time. There was a morning when she leaned across my desk at work and whispered that one of the managers thought I was too emotional, that it was holding me back from a promotion. I laughed nervously because it stung, but I told her I appreciated the honesty. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every meeting I'd been in, wondering if I had talked too much or let my nerves show. I didn't sleep well, and the next day I tried to act calmer, more composed, which only made me feel stiff and fake. Later, I learned from another colleague that the manager had said no such thing. Claire had simply made it up. But when I asked her about it, she smiled in that tired, slightly pitying way and said, "You know people never say these things directly. They confide in me because they know I care. It was such a clever twist. Instead of defending myself, I ended up thanking her for warning me. That became a pattern. She fed me these little half-truths, shaping how I saw myself and others, and I swallowed it because I trusted her more than I trusted my own instincts. There was a day I'll never forget. I came into the office, juggling my coffee and my bag, and Claire looked at me with this urgent expression. She pulled me aside into the break room and told me another friend, Marissa, had been mocking me behind my back. She said Marissa called me needy, said I was always clinging to people, desperate for attention. My face went hot. I could practically hear Marissa's laugh in my head, see the way she looked at me across the conference table. For weeks I avoided Marissa, keeping conversations short, pretending I was busy whenever she asked if I wanted to grab lunch. Claire, meanwhile, slid into that empty space, always there, always ready to reassure me that she was the only one I could truly count on. And I believed it. My trust in her became a shield I held up against everyone else, even when that shield was the very thing cutting me off from people who actually cared. At home, Daniel started to notice. He'd ask me why I seemed so drained after spending time with Claire, why I was suddenly second-guessing everything from what I wore to how I spoke. I brushed it off, told him he didn't understand our friendship. I even defended her, saying she just wanted the best for me. But the truth was, her words were carving me hollow. Every lie, every invented story about someone else made me a little smaller. I began to see myself through her lens, like I was broken, fragile, in need of her guidance to survive. It's embarrassing to admit now, but part of me liked the drama she brought into my life. It gave me something to fix, something to obsess over, and in some twisted way, it made me feel important. Like if people were talking about me, even negatively, then at least I mattered. That's the poison of lies. You start confusing them with attention, and attention feels like love. Things escalated in ways I didn't even notice at first. Claire became the filter through which I saw almost everything. If someone at work complimented me, she'd later tell me it was fake, that they didn't really mean it, that they were probably jealous or mocking me behind my back. If Daniel planned something sweet, like cooking dinner or surprising me with flowers, she'd suggest he was overcompensating, that maybe he felt guilty about something I didn't know. These comments were subtle, said casually, as if she were just looking out for me. And yet, they planted seeds of doubt in my mind that grew into thick vines, wrapping around every part of my life. I remember one Saturday morning, Daniel and I went out for brunch. It was sunny, the kind of crisp day where the air feels clean and you want to linger outside. We sat on the patio of our favourite cafe, laughing about something silly, when I suddenly remembered Claire's words from the night before. She had told me Daniel was too good at pretending, that men like him always had another side they kept hidden. As I looked at him across the table, his eyes squinting in the sunlight, smiling at me like I was the only person in the world, I felt this sick twist in my stomach. Instead of enjoying the moment, I was scanning his face for lies that weren't even there. When I got home, I texted Claire about the brunch, and she replied, "Just be careful, sweetie. Sometimes the people closest to us are the ones we should fear most." Reading that message, I actually felt grateful to her. Grateful that she cared enough to warn me. That's how deep her grip was. I mistook her poison for protection. And it wasn't just about Daniel. She managed to drive wedges into my friendships too. My best friend from college, Jenna, called one night, asking why I hadn't been around. Claire had already told me Jenna was tired of me, that she only called when she needed favours. So I lied, told Jenna I was too busy, and after we hung up, I felt guilty, but also convinced I was saving myself from hurt. Slowly, my world shrank until it was just Claire and me. Everyone else faded into shadows. people I couldn't fully trust anymore. Even my family noticed. My mum asked if I was okay, said I seemed withdrawn, distracted. I snapped at her, told her she was overreacting, but deep down I knew she was right. I just couldn't admit it, because admitting it meant admitting I had let someone control me with nothing more than whispers. The lies became so normal that I didn't even question them. It was like living in a house where the lights flicker constantly. You stop noticing the darkness creeping in, until one day you realise you're sitting in the pitch black. That realisation didn't come yet, though. At that point, I was still stumbling around, still convinced that Claire was my anchor. But there were moments, small cracks, when my gut tried to speak, like when Daniel showed me old texts to prove his loyalty, or when Marissa reached out with genuine kindness. Each time, though, Claire had an explanation ready, and I chose her version of reality over the truth staring me in the face. The breaking point didn't come all at once. It started with a slow drip of inconsistencies, things that didn't quite line up when I replayed them in my mind. One afternoon at work, Claire told me she had overheard Marissa talking to our manager about how unreliable I was. It stung, but I kept my face neutral, nodded like I could handle it. Later that week, I ran into Marissa in the parking lot, and she asked if I was free to help her prep a presentation because she thought I was so good at organising slides. I froze. Why would she compliment me if she thought I was unreliable? The thought nagged at me all night, echoing in my head. But instead of confronting Claire, I told myself I must have misinterpreted something. That was my pattern. Doubt myself before I doubted her. There was also the time Claire swore she had spoken to HR about putting my name forward for a leadership program. She said they told her I wasn't the right fit because of my so-called emotional streak. Weeks later, during a staff meeting, HR mentioned the program and encouraged everyone to apply directly. Apply directly. My stomach dropped because Claire had never told me that part. She had made it sound like she had done me a favour by bringing it up on my behalf. But in truth, she had shut the door before I could even walk through it. I felt cheated, but then I remembered how she smiled at me when she said she was only trying to save me from disappointment. That smile had always been her weapon, warm enough to disarm me, sharp enough to cut me without leaving a mark. At home, the tension with Daniel grew. He told me he felt like he was competing with Claire, that she had become this third presence in our relationship. I hated admitting it, but he was right. Every decision I made, every emotion I felt, I filtered through her first. If she disapproved, I second-guessed myself. If she approved, I clung to it like validation. Daniel once asked me, "Do you even trust me anymore, or do you just trust her?" The question made me cry, not because I didn't know the answer, but because I did. One evening, I invited Claire over for dinner with us. I thought maybe if she and Daniel spent time together, things would ease. Instead, she spent the whole night making little digs, disguised as jokes. She teased Daniel for working late, suggested he was hiding things, laughed at my cooking as though it were cute but pitiful. By the end of the night, Daniel was furious and I was torn. I wanted to defend him, but I also feared losing her approval. When she left, Daniel turned to me and said, "She doesn't like us together." I snapped back, accused him of being paranoid. But deep down, I knew he was right. That night, I barely slept. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how my life had twisted into this mess where I felt closer to someone who constantly undermined me than to the man who loved me. And still, I couldn't let go. It was like being hooked on a drug that was slowly killing me. You know it's toxic, but the withdrawal feels scarier than the poison. The first real crack in Claire's facade came unexpectedly, almost like life tossed me a lifeline I wasn't ready to grab. I was at the grocery store late one evening, trying to rush through the aisles before they closed. As I stood in line, I heard someone call my name. It was Jenna, my old college friend, the one I had been avoiding because Claire told me she was tired of me. Jenna looked genuinely happy to see me, and her smile carried none of the bitterness Claire had described. She asked why I had been distant, said she missed our coffee catch-ups. My throat tightened. For a second I wanted to blurt out everything, tell her the truth about why I had pulled away, but instead I mumbled something about being busy. Still, the warmth in her eyes lingered with me long after we hugged goodbye. That night, lying in bed next to Daniel, I kept replaying Jenna's words. There was no mockery, no hidden edge, just friendship. And it hit me that Claire had lied again. The realization was small but powerful. It was the first time I let myself really consider that maybe the problem wasn't everyone else. It was her. But even then, doubt gnawed at me. The next day I told Claire I'd run into Jenna, and she rolled her eyes, saying, "Of course she'll pretend to be sweet to your face. That's what fake people do." Her confidence was unnerving, and for a moment I almost believed her again. But a part of me, a stubborn part, held on to what I had seen in Jenna's expression. That seed of doubt grew. Around this time, Daniel grew more distant. He still loved me. I could feel it. But he was exhausted from competing with the shadow Claire cast over our lives. One evening he asked me quietly, "Do you even hear yourself anymore? You repeat her words like they're gospel." His voice cracked, and it hurt more than I expected. I wanted to scream that he was wrong, but deep inside I knew he wasn't. I had let Claire become the narrator of my life, and I was just an actor in the story she wrote. Work became another battlefield. I caught myself hesitating before answering questions, wondering what Claire would think, or replaying her warnings in my head. My confidence, once something I quietly relied on, was shredded into pieces. Colleagues noticed. Some stopped asking me to join projects, maybe because I seemed unsure, hesitant. I hated the version of myself I was becoming, yet I couldn't untangle from her grip. The strangest part is that Claire seemed to thrive on my weakness. The weaker I became, the stronger she appeared. She started giving me unsolicited advice about what to wear, how to style my hair, even which people to sit next to in meetings. At first I accepted it as kindness, but eventually it felt suffocating. Like she was building a cage around me, disguised as friendship. And yet, despite all of this, I still craved her approval. It was like chasing a high that never lasted. Looking back, I think part of me knew I was drowning, but I wasn't ready to admit who was pushing my head underwater. The turning point came on a rainy Friday evening. The office was almost empty because most people had left early to avoid the storm, but I stayed late, trying to catch up on work I had been too distracted to finish. Claire came by my desk with 2 coffees, smiling like she always did when she wanted to win me over. She sat down across from me, leaned in, and started talking in that hushed voice of hers, the one that always made it feel like she was sharing classified information. She said Daniel had been texting someone from work, that she had accidentally seen his name pop up on a colleague's phone. My stomach dropped. The words hit me like cold water, but instead of confronting her, I asked questions. Who was it? What did she see? How did she know? She gave me vague answers, circling around the details. Just enough to plant suspicion without giving me anything concrete. When I got home that night, Daniel was in the kitchen, cooking pasta and humming to himself. He looked so normal, so steady, but my head was spinning with doubts. I tried to act casual, but I must have been distant because he asked if I was okay. I said I was tired, but inside I was fighting with myself. Part of me wanted to believe him, and part of me heard Claire's voice echoing louder than my own. Later, while he slept, I looked through his phone. I hated myself for doing it, but I couldn't shake the image Claire had painted. I scrolled through messages, emails, even his social media. and there was nothing. No signs of betrayal, no secret chats. Just mundane conversations about work, bills, and takeout orders. Relief washed over me, but so did shame. I had let her lies push me into violating his trust. I sat on the bathroom floor that night, staring at myself in the mirror, realizing I didn't recognize the woman looking back. I had become suspicious, paranoid, consumed by whispers that weren't even mine. The next day, Daniel confronted me gently. He said he noticed I had been on his phone, and instead of being angry, he looked heartbroken. "When did you stop trusting me?" he asked quietly. I couldn't answer. I wanted to say I trusted him, but the truth was, I trusted Claire more than I trusted my own husband. That realization made my chest ache. Around this time, more cracks began to show in Claire's stories. She told me that a colleague had complained about me to HR, but when I nervously checked with HR myself, they looked confused and assured me no complaints had ever been filed. Another time she claimed Jenna had been spreading rumours about me. But when Jenna and I accidentally bumped into each other again, she was nothing but warm and sincere. These contradictions began piling up, like little stones in my pocket, weighing me down until I couldn't ignore them anymore. I started replaying every moment in my head, every warning, every whispered confession, and suddenly patterns emerged. She was always the messenger, never the source. She was always the one who knew the truth, but there was never any proof. For the first time, I allowed myself to ask the question I had been avoiding. What if Claire wasn't protecting me at all? What if she was the one tearing my life apart piece by piece? Once that question entered my mind, I couldn't push it away. It was like pulling a loose thread on a sweater. Suddenly, everything started to unravel. I replayed so many moments with Claire, moments I had brushed off before. The way she always appeared with bad news but never good. The way she framed herself as my saviour, swooping in with warnings only she could provide. The way her truths always isolated me from someone else. I began to test her quietly, without letting her know. One afternoon I mentioned that Daniel was thinking of taking me on a weekend trip, which wasn't true. I just wanted to see how she'd respond. She tilted her head, frowned, and said, "That's sweet, but don't you think it's suspicious he suddenly wants alone time with you?" My stomach tightened. I had given her bait, and she had done exactly what I feared. Turned something good into something ugly. Another day, I told her Jenna had invited me to dinner. Again, not true. She sighed, then leaned closer like she couldn't help herself. "Be careful, she's only inviting you because she wants to show off in front of her new friends." That was the moment I knew. It wasn't about protecting me. It was about controlling me, keeping me tethered to her version of reality. But knowing it and acting on it were two different things. I still felt hooked, like I needed her approval, even as I saw the poison dripping from her words. At home, Daniel noticed the shift. He told me I seemed lighter, like I wasn't carrying as much weight around. I didn't tell him why, but inside I knew it was because I was finally letting myself see her lies for what they were. Still, I wasn't ready to confront her. Fear held me back, the fear of losing a friend I had once considered family. The fear of admitting I had been so blind. And maybe, if I'm honest, the fear of being alone. But the truth was clawing its way to the surface, and I knew the day would come when I couldn't pretend anymore. The day everything started to collapse came sooner than I expected. It was a Tuesday afternoon, grey and cold, the kind of day when the office lights feel too harsh. I was sitting at my desk when Marissa walked over with a stack of papers. She smiled and said she was glad I'd agreed to help her review them. I blinked, confused, because I hadn't agreed to anything. When I asked her what she meant, she said Claire had told her I was happy to pitch in. My chest tightened. Claire had been speaking for me again, weaving me into situations I hadn't even known about. After Marissa left, I sat staring at my computer screen. my heart pounding. It wasn't just about lies whispered to me anymore. She was dragging my name into things I hadn't said or done. That night I told Daniel. I sat at the edge of our bed and finally admitted, I think Claire's been lying to me. Maybe to everyone. He looked at me for a long moment, and instead of saying, I told you so, he just pulled me into his arms. The relief I felt was overwhelming. I had been carrying this secret weight for so long, afraid to even speak it aloud. And now that I had, it felt like breathing for the first time in months. Over the next week, I paid closer attention. I noticed how often her stories contradicted each other, how vague her details became when I pressed for specifics. Once, she claimed Jenna had been at a party gossiping about me. But 2 days later, she said Jenna hated going out and never socialised anymore. Another time, she told me Daniel's co-workers had made comments about me. But when I casually asked Daniel, he looked baffled. The lies were piling up faster than she could keep them straight. Still, she carried herself with the same confidence, the same soft tone, as though daring me to challenge her. And for the first time, I began to feel anger instead of fear. I started keeping notes, tiny scribbles in my planner, recording the things she said so I could track them. It sounds obsessive, but I needed proof. Not just for myself, but because I knew if I confronted her without it, she would twist it back on me like she always did. And maybe part of me wanted to see the pattern laid out in black and white, undeniable. The more I wrote, the clearer it became. She was feeding me lies, over and over, and I had been starving myself of the truth. When the truth finally came crashing down, it wasn't dramatic at first. It was small, almost quiet, but it hit me harder than anything else. I had written down in my planner that Claire said Marissa had been spreading rumours about me to our manager. A few days later, I overheard Marissa in the break room, talking to that same manager, laughing about weekend plans with her kids. Their conversation was warm, casual, filled with the kind of comfort that comes from mutual respect. I stood frozen in the hallway, realising there was no trace of tension. No hint that Marissa had been speaking ill of me. That night, I flipped through my notes, comparing stories, and the pattern was undeniable. Claire wasn't just bending the truth, she was fabricating entire realities. I felt sick, but also strangely clear, like fog lifting after a long storm. The next morning, I decided to test her again. I mentioned casually that Jenna had invited me on a trip out of town. Her reaction was immediate. She frowned, leaned in and whispered, I wouldn't go. Jenna has been telling people she only keeps you around out of pity. My hands shook as I wrote her words down later. There it was. Another lie. Another knife dressed as concern. That evening, Daniel saw me scribbling in my notebook and asked what I was doing. I told him everything. How I had been keeping track. How the lies lined up like dominoes. He listened without interrupting, then said, You have to confront her. She's not going to stop on her own. The thought terrified me. Claire was skilled at twisting situations, turning any confrontation into a pity play, where I ended up apologising. But Daniel was right. I couldn't keep living in her shadow, doubting everyone else just to keep her close. So I planned. I decided I would choose one specific lie, one I could prove beyond doubt, and bring it to her calmly, without emotion. I told myself if she admitted it, maybe I could forgive her. But if she denied it, if she turned it back on me again, then I'd know I had to walk away. Deep down, though, I already knew the answer. The confrontation happened on a Thursday evening after work. I asked Claire to meet me at a little coffee shop near the office, the kind with dim lighting and mismatched chairs that usually made me feel safe. My hands were trembling as I stirred my latte, waiting for her to arrive. When she walked in, she gave me that bright smile that used to comfort me. But now all I saw was manipulation hiding behind it. We sat down and I tried to steady my voice. I told her I had heard from Marissa that she never said the things Claire claimed. I said it calmly, without anger, just laying it out. Claire's smile faltered for the briefest second. Then she laughed softly and said, "Oh, honey, of course she'd deny it to your face. That's how fake people operate." The way she dismissed it so easily made my blood boil, but I forced myself to stay composed. I pulled out my notebook, opened it to the pages where I had written her exact words, dates and all. I slid it across the table and said, "Do you see the pattern here? Every single thing you've told me contradicts itself. You say one person hates me, but then they show me nothing but kindness. You say Daniel's lying, but I've seen the proof that he isn't. You've been feeding me lies, Claire." Her face hardened in a way I had never seen before. The softness was gone, replaced with something sharp, almost cruel. She leaned back in her chair, crossed her arms, and said, "So what? You think you'd have figured anything out without me? You need me more than you realise." Her words hit me like a slap. For a moment, fear gripped me, because part of me believed her. She had woven herself so tightly into my life that I wasn't sure who I was without her constant commentary. But then I thought about Daniel's face when he asked if I trusted him. About Jenna's warmth, about Marissa's kindness, about my mum's concern. They had all been steady while Claire had been chaos, and suddenly I saw her for what she was. Not a friend, not family, but a parasite feeding on my insecurities. I closed the notebook, stood up, and said quietly, "I don't need this anymore." My legs were shaking as I walked out, but with every step, the air felt lighter, like I was finally breathing without her shadow pressing down on me. The days after that confrontation felt strange, almost hollow. For so long, Claire's voice had been in my ear, shaping every thought, every decision, and now there was silence. At first, I didn't know what to do with it. I would reach for my phone instinctively to text her about something small, then stop myself, remembering that door was closed. It was like breaking a habit, one I hadn't even realised had consumed me. Daniel noticed the difference right away. He said I seemed calmer, lighter, like the tension I'd been carrying in my shoulders had finally eased. For the first time in months, we laughed together without me second-guessing the meaning behind his words. I could see how much it meant to him, and that gave me strength. At work, I slowly began repairing the relationships she had fractured. I apologised to Marissa for being distant, explained that I had been struggling. She didn't ask for details, just smiled and said she was glad to have me back. With Jenna, it took more courage. I called her one evening, my heart pounding as I waited for her to pick up. When she did, I told her the truth. Not everything, but enough. That I had let someone's lies come between us. That I had doubted her when I shouldn't have. She was quiet for a moment, then said, "I always knew you'd figure it out." Real friends don't vanish because of rumours. Hearing her say that made me cry. But it was the good kind of crying, the kind that washes something clean. Even with those small victories, though, I couldn't shake the anger I felt toward Claire. Not just for the lies, but for how easily I had believed them. I replayed moments in my head and wondered how I could have been so blind. But then I reminded myself that manipulation works best on those who care deeply. And caring isn't a weakness. The weakness was letting her twist that care into control. I started journaling every night, pouring out the thoughts I had once reserved for her. It was messy at first, but slowly it became healing. Instead of waiting for her approval, I was learning to listen to my own voice again. The silence that once felt empty began to feel peaceful, and I realised maybe that was what freedom sounded like.